Okay, so I'll start directly. You wrote about the connection between the Putin regime and the far right in Europe before Russia launched its large-scale aggression against Ukraine, because the war began a long time ago with the invasion of Crimea. We are in a different context now, but we are before the new European elections, where the main danger seems to come precisely from the rise of the far right. So, first of all, do you see this as a serious and, above all, unified threat? Do all these far right parties have a common agenda?
Well, I would start with saying that we need to distinguish between what we mean by the threat of the far right. If by this threat we mean that the far right will somehow increase more sympathies towards the Putin regime or the Kremlin, I don't think that this is entirely correct, because as we see in many cases, the far right has somehow modified the approach towards the Kremlin regime. And I can give you a couple of examples, actually some even major examples, is the Rassemblement National, the far-right party, the main far-right party in France, where Marine Le Pen in 2014, her party even took a loan, a 9 million loan from a Russian bank, and she met with Putin even 1 month before the elections in 2017 in France, the presidential elections. And she was generally considered to be Putin's candidate for president of France. But the war, or not the war, but the full-scale invasion of Ukraine made her change the position, because obviously she's a populist, and the full-scale aggression was not popular, and it's not popular in Europe, right? So she had to respond to these sentiments in the French society, and she could no longer give support to Putin. So at least on the level of rhetoric, she condemned the full-scale aggression on the same day, on the 24th of February 2022, and it was unequivocal, unambiguous condemnation of the full-scale aggression. And since then, I don't consider her to be like a real supporter of Ukraine, but at least the dynamic shows that she is at least trying to move away from the Kremlin on the rhetorical level. And actually they repaid the 9 million euros loan last year, again, in order to show that no, we are not dependent on Russia. Another example is the Brothers of Italy, a far-right party in Italy, Fratelli d'Italia, where this party, before the full-scale aggression, they would also criticize the sanctions against Russia and give commentary to the Russian state-controlled media. But after they came to power, and after the the start of the full-scale aggression against Ukraine, Giorgia Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy, is now a great supporter of Ukraine, and even the party Lega Nord, or the League of Matteo Salvini, and Matteo Salvini was also known to visit Moscow several times, wearing a T-shirt with Putin, and actually also having an agreement with Putin's party, United Russia. So an official agreement for cooperation between the two parties, and they are now voting in the parliament, in the Italian parliament, to supply military aid to Ukraine. So you see, there is this dynamic, but of course, pro-Kremlin far-right parties remain, and most importantly in Germany and in Hungary. In Hungary, Fidesz, the ruling party, it's a far-right party. They are very ambiguous on this whole issue of Ukraine, and technically also, they support Russia rather than Ukraine. And Alternative for Germany has now become the largest well, one of the largest far-right parties of the sort of this pro-Kremlin persuasion in Europe. And they became even more pro-Kremlin after the start of the full-scale of aggression against Ukraine. And also parties in Austria, the Freedom Party of Austria, although technically they consider themselves as neutral in the conflict, but in any conflict, neutrality benefits the aggressor. So despite their sort of this neutralist position or fake neutralist position, the Kremlin is benefiting from this. So I expect it's not that the rise of the far right technically translates into more pro-Russian sentiments, but the popularity or the rise of particular far-right parties will contribute to this. And to reiterate, that's going to be in Germany, in Austria. So let's see how other countries will play. But yeah, I'm mostly concerned about these two countries, Germany, Austria, and Hungary. But the support for Fidesz is quite stable and high. So probably there will be no real.
And also there are some populist things in mainstream parties. But in your research, have you been able to determine the stance of the Romanian far right regarding its connection with Russia, or the utility it provides for the Kremlin?
Well, for a long, as you know, I'm not a specialist on Romania, so maybe you know more than I do. But it was my impression that the Romanian far right, for a very long time, remained quite an insignificant force. There were various organizations on the far right, especially after the death of Vadim Tudor, and basically his party declined in popularity. It's Romania Mare, and there were a few very small organizations which would be also building their legacy on probably Corneliu Codreanu, that were sort of somehow sympathetic towards Russia. But at the same time, so probably today the party Aur is of that direction, being radical right-wing populist, and at the same time, making statements that are beneficial to the Kremlin. But of course, the question remains whether this party is an actual party, not the creation of I don't know, political technology or Romanian secret services, right? So I'm not so sure that this is an actual far-right party, so to say. And Romania, historically, Romania is very skeptical towards Russia, and Romanian nationalism is in many ways anti-Russian, or against Russian imperialism. So Romania, on the map of my research, at least in the terms of the far right, does not stand significantly as somehow problematic in this way.
But is the far right the only avenue of influence that Russia is building in the West? Because isn't it surprising that Russia can still use its huge propaganda machinery even after entering Ukraine with tanks? Because
absolutely. All those connections between Russia and the far right, they are not the primary plan, or even not the primary area where how Russia influences Western decisions. Their main target and their main ally, in a way, is the corrupt centrist politicians, corrupt mainstream politicians. This is how they work. Metaphorically saying, the Russian contact or the Russian influence over Gerhard Schröder, former chancellor of Germany, coming from the center-left party, the Social Democratic Party of Germany, the value of that contact with Schröder is many times, more significant than Le Pen. Schröder costs maybe dozens of Le Pens. And this is most important, and especially because it is the mainstream parties that have access or somehow control over big businesses, over the economic relations. Again, Merkel, who supported Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, did considerably much more damage than any far-right leader in Europe. This is just, you cannot even compare the damage that the mainstream politicians, who were for many years in contact and quite friendly, or at least made business with Russia in the banking sector, but especially in the energy sector, they made just incredibly much more damage than any far-right organization or party.
We saw how Russia used this corruption as an instrument of control in Moldavia, for example.
Of course, yes. The corrupting mainstream politicians is the primary strategy of influence, of Russian influence. And then afterwards came, different political strategy, building political alliances. But this is not the, but corruption is one of the just major primary instruments.
What are Russia's narratives in the West these days? In Romania, revisionist narratives have been recently used, reintroduced onto the agenda with direct support coming from Russia, because Putin mentioned this.
Yeah, well, Putin, over the years, he has become interested in what he thinks is history. And he has become an obsessive lecturer of history, and if you are not even expecting, he will give you a historical lecture just compulsively. It's something has to do with his mental state of mind. Historical revisionism, as we see from his bizarre statements, has become even one of the major foundations of his war against Ukraine. He creates this historical narrative. Of course, it is, in many ways, underpinned by various Russian historical narratives. He created one of the narratives that he adopted, probably even from this Russian historical revisionists, is the eternal war between the West and the East. And this is the war that he is fighting, or he is protecting the East, which is now associated mostly with Russia, as a separate civilization, which is not, part of the West. So this eternal war, and by producing this narrative, it can explain many things. And Ukraine is in this framework, in this historical framework, Ukraine is a territory of the East that the West is trying to steal from Russia. This is why Russia is fighting this war, in order to protect the East. So that is the main historical narrative that may help us explain how Putin and, Russia in general, as a state, views international relations.
He wants to leave a legacy, so it's more dangerous now. He is more dangerous now because he thinks about his legacy.
Exactly. I would say that he has made very important steps to create this sense of symbolical immortality. Building this legacy that he will be remembered as the great leader of Russia. So, and because of this, he's becoming even more dangerous. Because now it is not a fight for his wealth. He doesn't need wealth. It's even ridiculous to think that he somehow, wants to just become or remain the rich person. It doesn't really matter. The legacy, the historical role, the place in Russia's history. This is what's important, and he will fight this war till he will not stop. This is about him now.
Mm-hmm. So there are talks now on the risk of expanding or escalating war. is a scenario that you see possible? Wouldn't it be, I don't know, a different kind of war? Because Putin's narrative regarding Ukraine, you said, does that apply outside of what he considers the core of Russian world, like Russia, Belarus, Ukraine?
There is, I think, this option for him to expand the war. And we also see preparations for the larger offensive, for the larger conflict with the West. We see that Russia is, its economy turning onto this war footing, so it's becoming increasingly militarized. They are changing the whole strategic approach to their economy. They are becoming a war economy. And this is not, this is not just a light observation, because it is very difficult to for the economy to become this military or war economy. You have to change many things. The industry as well. To produce more tanks, to produce more ammunition, you need to cut many other things. So they're becoming this hugely militarized. They are teaching their pupils, their students, to operate drones, for example, and they are strengthening their military forces, not even close to Ukraine, but further to the north. The Baltic states. Now also with NATO and Finland joining, Sweden and Finland joining NATO, they have more military force there. And they're changing the whole infrastructure, which means that they are being serious about waging a war, not only against Ukraine, but also against NATO.
Mm-hmm. It is important to also look at the narratives of the Putin regime inside Russia. What is Putin telling the Russian? I don't know, does the concept of collective guilt apply here? Because we had elections yesterday and Putin was, of course, re-elected with a large majority.
Well, that was not an election at all. It's just a process that they call election, but it's not an election at all. We cannot even refer to this as an election. And no, Putin is popular. I will not say that he is supported by around 88%, something that they just created this number. But he has with the support of the majority. I'm not so sure that we can talk about guilt, because guilt is a very personal emotion. It's a very personal feeling. But I do believe that the Russian population has collective responsibility, for what is happening. It's not guilt. Yeah, guilty are those who commit war crimes and crimes against humanity. But this collective responsibility for what is going on, I think it is quite legitimate to talk about this.
Mm-hmm. The strategy of the West in the face of Russian propaganda is to use debunking. How effective is that? Because when Russia says something, it's already said.
You see, I am of an opinion that debunking is useless in terms of somehow trying to reconvince people. It can work, yeah, for sure, but I think the efficiency is not very high. So out of, say, 100 people who were exposed to propaganda, well, maybe 5 people can be reconvinced, or even more, but I don't think it is going to be a majority. But there is another thing where I still believe that debunking is important. For example, debunking should remain an aspect or a part of the work of official structures in the West, at least. Let me give you an example. So if Russia says, if the Kremlin declares, or Putin, that, say, Romania is bringing nuclear weapons to the country in order to attack Russia, It is a responsibility and it is a must for the Romanian authorities to say, this is not true. We are not doing this. Because this is an accusation that needs to be not necessarily, well, it's not about debunking, it's about declaring that something is not true. And the Romanian authorities must do this. You know, it's not a matter of choice, you know, whether they just remain silent or not. No, they need to say this is not true. But if we're talking about the population or societies, debunking will probably not be very efficient. So I guess that pre-bunking as a strategy is much more important. And pre-bunking is based on some of the principles of communication theory. And there is this inoculation theory, where it is important for the media structures, for media workers, media agencies, to be quicker in providing an objective picture of the developments or events that are happening, in order not to let all those conspiracy theorists and other malign actors to flood the information space with various versions. Because people, according to this inoculation theory, people who are not aware, who don't have any prior knowledge about a particular event or a development, they tend to believe the first interpretation of that event or development that they hear. So it is very important that they hear first an objective and a true version of the events.
But semantic is important in everywhere, but in this war is more important. I was thinking of the beginning of this war of genocide. What do you think? Does Russia commit genocide in Ukraine or not? Because it's an ongoing discussion, let's say.
Yeah, the full scale, in my opinion, the full scale invasion of Ukraine has a genocidal nature. And Putin said it directly when he said that one of the objectives of the special military operation is denazification of Ukraine. It must be, it's just very important to understand that by Nazis, well, Nazism here in this word has nothing to do with political ideology. Nazis are those people, those Ukrainians who believe that they are Ukrainians, that they have a Ukrainian national identity.
For Putin, they are traitors. For Putin, they are traitors. For a KGB person,
yes, they're traitors, and we know what treason means in this situation. That traitors must be killed. So some of the observers and even experts and ideologues, Russian ideologues, they would say it quite clearly. Denazification means de-Ukrainization. It is against the Ukrainian national identity, not only against the authorities or the military. No, it's against the Ukrainian national identity. It's about erasing this identity, which is a genocide. Genocide is not only killing people directly. It's about taking their children and taking them from Ukraine to Russia in order to Russianize them. This is also, according to the definition of a genocide by the United Nations, this is also part of a genocide. And creating conditions that are unbearable for living. Russia is engaged in a genocidal attack. It doesn't mean that they will be successful. Or that their genocide is, being successful, but the aim, the objective, is quite clear for me.
It's my last question. What does the Ukrainian resistance depend on at this moment? Can European Union help Ukraine without United States?
Ukraine's resistance, in my opinion, has two major foundations. One foundation is the resilience of the Ukrainian society and the resilience of the Ukrainian military. And the other foundation is the military aid and also financial aid from the West. So without any of these foundations, Ukraine will lose, either without resilience or without the aid from the West. So As for the European help, I think that still Europe, even without the US, will need to have access to other production of the ammunition. Europe, unfortunately, is not capable of producing the amount of ammunition that is needed to defend Ukraine, but also to defend itself. Frankly speaking, Europe for many decades lived under this illusion that a huge war on the European continent is not possible. Well, and despite the warnings coming from Poland, from the Baltic states, Western Europe lived under this illusion. Now this illusion is shattered. You will hear statements coming from even Western Europe that probably the period of peace is over on the European continent, and Europe needs to be prepared for a large-scale conflict. So it will be very, very difficult, but not impossible, for Europe to produce the right amount of ammunition, but also looking for support from outside. But without the US, it will be quite difficult. Although, yes, Russia has some support from China, in a way, from Iran, North Korea. But I just recently read a newspaper article. I cannot say that that it's just a relevant source, but there was an estimate that in order for Europe to replace US aid for Ukraine, it will cost like 65 euros per every citizen per year, I guess. So the amount that is needed is not really high. But the question is about the product capability, industrial capabilities, because even if you have money, if you don't have the industrial capacity, this money may not be that important.
So economy of war also in Europe. Europe should think about a sort of war economy also. Yes,
I guess that the war is coming. The war is coming. So Europe should be prepared. And even if it's not even about Russia as such, we are now increasingly living in a multipolar world. And multipolar world means more military conflicts. It's not only about Russia. It's just the world is changing. And Europe should change too, if it wants to survive in this turbulent geopolitical time.
Do you share the opinion that we are facing a fight between democracy and autocracy?
Maybe not. Maybe not. It's about something else. It's not only because. Yes, democratic. The West is largely democratic, and the threat is coming from not non-democratic states. But I think there is something deeper going on. It's also about, say, the Green Revolution. Some of the countries, such as Russia and Iran, they're threatened by the Green Revolution. They fear that they will lose the profits that they had because of these developments. So there are many factors at play. I just don't think that saying that democracy versus autocracy is the correct umbrella explanation of what we are facing. I think it's much deeper than this.